think we're ready to start, Harold, right?
Yes, we have Rabbi, Cantor Nimi, with a, I'm sorry, I'm so excited with all these guests. I don't know what to say. Cantor, over to you.
So I recognize the last verse of Psalm 20 as being one of the 8 biblical verses that some recite before the blessings for Havdalah. It's the 6th of the 8 verses that start with Hine El Yeshuati. And so I thought that I'd share. There's a tune that a lot of people sing for these verses if they don't chant the nusach, chant it in the mode. And the tune is actually from the Mojitz Hasidic community for another text that some people recite on Motzei Shabbat, the Ten Lecha. But I also would note, I'm going to sing the Mojitz tune, that if one were to chant this text in a Eastern European style of the Chazanut or the Nusach, the mode actually shifts on this verse, or can shift on this verse. Where if you're starting in Fragish, like Adonai Tzevaot Ashrei Adam Boteach Bach, you would switch at Adonai Hoshia HaMelech Ya'anenu Ve'yom Kore'enu, and then continue on in major into the blessings. But here is the Mojitz Hasidic tune. When we get into Psalm 20, you'll recognize hopefully the verse that I've put in bold here when we get to that far. Hine El Yeshuati Eftach V'lo Efchad Ki Ozi Bezimrat Ya Adonai Vayehi Li Yeshua She'altem Mayim B'saso Mimayinei HaYeshua L'Adonai HaYeshua Alamcha B'chatecha Sela Adonai Tzivaot Imanu Niskav Lanu Elohei Yaakov Sela Adonai Tzevaot Ashrei Adam Boteach Bach Adonai Hoshia HaMelech Yaneinu Ve'yom Koreinu HaYehudim Hayta Ora Ve'simcha Ve'sason V'ikar Ken Tieh Lanu Ub'shem Adonai Ekra.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Cantor Nimi. And to those who are new today, welcome, welcome, welcome. Harold Levine is our TA for the class. And if you want to be on the email list and get emails with texts and follow up, you're very welcome. And we also have a Facebook group which is quite active sometimes and a wonderful place where people post. So today we're beginning Psalm 20. And as I said, tomorrow, since I'll be driving to the funeral, the class will be studying it in Chavruta. And we'll start as usual with looking fairly closely at the Hebrew and English, and then we'll launch off from there. We might even get to look at a little Bernstein to show you how the radical change it is. Psalm 20 is not only, as Cantor Nimi correctly pointed out, that verse is in Havdalah. The psalm itself is said in daily morning davening. It's called the Lamanatzeach Psalm, which is kind of crazy because there are many Lamanatzeach Psalms. But in morning Shachrit, not on Shabbos and Yom Tov, but on daily davening, it's a regular psalm in the morning service. Often overlooked because it's usually said silently, although there is some beautiful chanting that's done for this psalm, and it has some particular, well, let's jump into it. So do we have somebody who'd want to read it through in the Hebrew? And for those who are new today, not everybody can read Hebrew, so don't worry, but we do have some Hebrew readers.
Waiting for a hand, maybe Sarah Sloan. Who wants to do it?
I'll do it.
All right, Sarah.
Okay, but I can't read the first line because it's covenant. Lamnatzech mizmor leDavid. Yancha Adonai b'yom tzara yishkavech shem Elohei Yaakov. Yishlach ezrach mikodesh umitzion yisadecha. Yizkor kol menuchatecha v'letecha yidshena sela. Yiten lecha kalbecha v'kol atzatecha yimaleh. Nivarcha b'yishuatecha v'shem Eloheinu nigdal. Yimaleh Adonai kol misholotecha. Ata yadati ki hoshia Adonai mismicho yanehu mishmo kodsho. B'gvurat yishev yamino. Ela bracha ve'ela besusim ve'anachnu b'shem Adonai Eloheinu naskir. Hema karu v'nafalu ve'anachnu kamnu v'nit odeid. Adonai Hoshia hamelech yanenu b'yom karenu.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sarah. Somebody to read it through in English?
I saw Kenneth Carpel first.
To the conductor, the Psalm of David. May Adonai respond to you on a troubled day. May the name God of Jacob lift you up, sending help to you from the holy place, support for you out of Zion, taking note of every meal you have offered up, accepting the fullness of the offerings you have burnt, Selah, giving to you according to the yearnings of your heart, fulfilling each detail of the guidance you have given. Let us sing out at your deliverance, stretch forth a banner in the name of our God. May Adonai fulfill all your petitions. Now I know that Adonai has brought victory to the anointed ruler, responding from his holy heaven through the victorious power of his right hand. These invoke chariots and these horses, but we invoke the name of Adonai our God. These bent over and fell, but we rose up and stood erect. Adonai, bring us victory. O Majesty, may you respond to us on the day that we call.
Okay, so we'll start by our usual exercise, and to get into the discipline of this, every time you approach a translation, which I remind you, and I'll say over and over again, every translation is an interpretation. And when we look at Bernstein, you'll see some quite radical change from, this is Levy's translation. So Levy, as we see, sticks to the basic architecture of the Psalm. We see there are 10 verses, so we can, since we're now getting used to looking at Psalms, 10 is pretty short, not the shortest, but pretty short. Levy keeps the numbering of the Psalms and tries to stay pretty close to the original Hebrew. And where he sees the Yud He Vav He name of God, the name of the most profound unity of the universe, he uses the word Adonai because he doesn't want to use an English word that he wants to remind us we don't know what this there's mystery to it. So he's maintaining the Hebrew there. And in the Hebrew itself, he doesn't write out Yud He Vav He. He is Yud Yud wherever there's Yud He Vav He. So I'm just reminding us what we now know of Levi and his approach. He wants there to be a spiritual meaning. So he doesn't always stick. He's not doing this to teach us something about the biblical Hebrew. He's trying to teach us something about the Psalm, but he stays pretty close. So that's why I like starting with him. I'm moving us away from Sepharia, as I think as a class, we're getting a little bit more sophisticated. And I can point out something. So Lama Natseach, again, this is a very common opening. And as we've talked about it, it's some kind of leader. And because we think the Psalms are so deeply musical, we're assuming that it's a musical leader, like a conductor. We don't know for sure, but when we see Lama Natseach, we can imagine this is a superscription. This is a verse that's giving choreographic information or somehow telling the music conductor some information that we might not even understand what it is. But so that's why Levy keeps it in, but you'll notice he has a gap between verses 1 and 2. And he does that in order to emphasize he does not think of that first line as really part of the Psalm, but he doesn't do what others do, which is to simply eliminate it. He wants it there, but he wants us to understand that it's a superscription. It's not part of the psalm itself in the way we think of poetry. Is that clear to everybody? And this is how we notice formatting is really important. And then when he has gaps between sentences in the formatting, he's making some kind of point. We have to try and figure out what it is sometimes, but this place, it's pretty clear. He's trying to make a distinction between the superscription and the rest of the psalm. And that's true of all of Levi. You'll see that every time we look at a Levi, there's a gap between that. Okay. Yancha Yud He Vav He Biyom Tzara. This psalm is very, very, very famous as a psalm said in times of trouble or times of facing danger because of these words. And it's very popular in Christian settings. And we'll talk a little bit about why in particular, but Christians, as we know, love the Psalms. The Psalms are very powerful, but there's a little bit of a strange issue with the Hebrew grammar here, which I'm not going to focus on because I want to get through the whole psalm, and it's not really the point, but there is, for those of you who know Hebrew, you'll see there's a little bit of a grammatical issue here, but let's use his translation. May Adonai, so it's imperfect tense, which is not exactly the same thing as future. Remember, imperfect tense in a verb form means it's not yet completed. So in English, we could use a lot of different constructions for imperfect, although in English grammar, I don't think we usually use imperfect. So may or should, or it should be so. It's not exactly future tense. It's not present tense, and it's not past tense. It's more like it hasn't yet been completed. So Yancha Yud He Vav He, may the Holy One, may the power in the universe that brings holiness into the world answer you. That is so strong. So if we understand Yud He Vav He, as I've tried to emphasize is my personal spiritual reading of it, Yud He Vav He is the breath of the universe, the breath that has created life itself. So this psalm is saying, may the power which has created life itself and the power that is there for the world, for good, for holiness, for all things that are sacred, may that power respond to you, literally answer you. When? Biyom, on the day of Tzara. Tzara is the singular of the word tsaris, which we all know, because Jews only talk about trouble in plural, of course, but Tzara is actually the singular of the word for trouble or difficulty or pain, right? So Tzara, and it is from the same shoresh as the word Mitzrayim, which we talk about a narrow place where things are constricted and oppressed. Yancha Yud He Vav He, may the Holy One respond to you on a difficult day, on a day of trouble, on a day of struggle. May the name Elohei Yaakov, Elohei is gods of or God of Jacob, lift you up. So may the acknowledgement of our ancestors give you strength, in other words. Verse 3, Yishlach Ezracha Bikodesh. Yishlach, shalach, lishloach is to send, or we have mishloach manot, for instance, on Purim is to send gifts, to send those packages. So this is the same shoresh, the same root, mishloach. May, again, in the same thing, this yishlach, it's this imperfect tense. May this Holy One, so to speak, that referring back to verse 2, send you help. From where? Where should you get help from? Mikodesh. Kodesh, Kedusha, Kiddush, Kaddish. All of those words are about holiness. May you get help from the holy place. In other words, from the source of good in the universe, from the source of all things that are life affirming. Umitzion Yisadecha. Sa'ad is a foundation or support or strength. And from Tzion, may you get this kind of support. So again, you see the biblical parallelism of the two parts. And what I like about Levi is that in the Hebrew, for those who are following in the Hebrew, he makes sure you can see the two halves of the verse. So you see it really clearly, the biblical parallelism. And he does it in the English. So it's really help. So for instance, in verse 3, sending help to you from the holy place, support for you out of Zion. So sending help for you, support for you, those are parallel but said slightly differently. And holy place and Zion are two different words for holy places. 4, yizkor, from the verb lizkor, to remember, like yizker, what we say with our American Yiddish pronunciation, yizker. This is the Hebrew word yizkor, to remember. Again, in the same tense, kol menochatecha, taking note or remembering this by meaning offering, not an offering like a sacrifice, but this verse is really referring to the biblical offerings of sacrifice. But remember, these psalms were written at the time there was actual, the temple existed, but we understand these as spiritual offerings. Verse 5, Yiten lecha chilvavecha, giving to you. Yiten is latet, is to give, lecha, to you. Now look at kilvavecha. Levav is a heart, like lev, shalem, and bechol levavcha. And the shoresh of lev is actually lamed bet bet. It's a 3-letter shoresh with the bet is duplicated, which is why it functions. We say bechol levavcha, but a lev shalem is the shorter version of it. But this is the same word. So giving to you, you will receive according to what your heart needs. V'chol atzatcha yimaleh, fulfilling every detail. So atzeh is like etza, which is guidance or advice, or every one of your fulfilling each detail of the guidance yimaleh will be fulfilled, will be filled. Maleh means filled or filled up. 6, Niranana, now it changes a little bit in energy, because up until from 2 to 5 is all these hopes that we'll receive, right? That we'll be, will receive help as we need it. Niranana, this is like the word we have in the Psalm for Kabbalat Shabbat. L'chu niranana, this is the same word. Let us sing bishuatecha, in your deliverance or your salvation or your saving us. Uv'shem Eloheinu nidgol, stretch forth a banner in the name of our God. Degel is a banner or a flag. Nidgol is a stretching forth this banner. Yimaleh Yud He Vav He Kol Mishalotecha. And this is kind of this is a flag with this is the bumper sticker. You know, this is the neon sign. And that's why Levi has it in quotes, to make sure you understand that this is on that degel, on the flag. May Yud He Vav He fulfill all your mishalatecha. She'elah is a question. So your requests, your questions, your needs, may you be fulfilled. Now, note that Levi has a gap between 6 and 7 and 7 and 8, and he is clearly making verse 7 a little bit of standing on its own. You see that? Everybody see that? So ata, now, ayin ata means now. Yadati, this is definitely a poetic play on sounds. Ata yadati is definitely, you can hear the sound of it. Now I know ki Hoshia Yud He Vav He Mishicho, that God has brought Hoshia, again the word that we had above, Bishuatecha, as salvation, Yud He Vav He Mishicho. So again, this is why for Christians this is a very significant word, because Mishicho means anointed one in general, and in biblical religion all kings were anointed, so it's referring to the anointed one, whoever is king. But for Christians, it's a very powerful word because it means Messiah. Mashiach is Messiah. So this is referring for Christians to Jesus. And now I know, so if you read it as a Christian, it would be read as, now I know that Adonai has brought victory to the Messiah, to Jesus. Ya'anehu mishmei kodsho. Responding, again, we have the word to respond or answer, the exact same word in the verse 2. Responding, there's a sense that we as human beings are in direct relationship with the source of holiness, the source of goodness, the source of all things that will make the world right, all things beautiful and powerful and good. Big vurot yesha yimeno, through the victorious power of his what hand? His right hand. We remember that whole controversy about right hands and left hands. We'll leave that for now, but I want you to notice this is another use of yamino.
The line before that, did you leave that out?
No, Ya'anehu, responding from Mishmei, Shammai, Mishmei, from the heavens of his holiness or his holy heaven. Again, Ya'anehu is the same word in verse 2 for respond. The psalm has a lot of sense that the Holy One, the place of holiness in the universe, is aware of us and will protect us in some way. A gap to verse 8. Ele, these, varechev, rechev is a chariot, ve'ele basusim, and these, a sus is a horse. So this chariot and these horses, va'anach, and then there's kind of it's an interesting sentence, va'anachnu b'shem yud hei vav hei Eloheinu nazkir. But we, in contrast to Ele, invoke, as he translated, b'shem, in the name of Yud Hei Vav Hei, the Holy One, the source of life, the source of breath. Eloheinu, we will remember. Nazkir, again, the same word as lizkor, yizker. So it sounds like it's contrasting. In this case, the biblical parallelism of verse 8 is the first phrase is in distinction with the second phrase, is a contradistinction, is a antipathy. Is that not antipathy? What's the word for
Antithesis.
opposite? What?
Antithesis.
Antithesis, thank you. Hema, verse 9. Hema karu v'naflu, these, in other words, referring back to the these of the beginning of verse 8, bent over and fell, they will not last, va'anachnu, but we, kamnu v'nit odad, but we will survive. We will stand up and we will survive. And 10, what Cantor Nimi so beautiful brought to us, Adonai Yud Hei Vav Hei will save, Hamelech Ya'anenu V'yom Karenu, the Holy One, the King, the Majesty, the Sovereign of all of us, Ya'anenu. For the third time, we have this verb to answer. That is not an accident. That's a poetic, it's functioning as to remind us of a motif that exists in this psalm, which is responsiveness, that there will be a response if we're open to it. Hamelech Ya'anenu, the Holy One, the Sovereign will answer us. Biyom, and this is to follow up on that first verse where it talked about Yancha Yud Hei Vav Hei Biyom Tzara. Yud Hei Vav Hei will answer us on the day Biyom Tzara, on the day of trouble. And then 10 is the coda, is the bookend to the psalm. Yud Hei Vav Hei will answer us, Ya'anenu V'yom Karenu, on the day of our trouble. But there's now an added element. It can't just be a day of trouble. We also have to reach out and ask for help. Okay, that is Psalm 20 in a quick overview of Levi. And before we go for questions or comments, can we look at Bernstein for a second?
Of course we can.
I want to see the contrast because I think it's really, I have to find my Bernstein.
Okay, coming up. All right. I think Ora Ezraki was our second English.
Okay,
reader.
Ora, would you read this in English?
Hold on, let me get it. Here we go.
When times are hard and you are scared and need and cry, my God, hear me. May he remember when you sang to him, reached out to him with thanks and praise. When times were good, may he feel your pleading soul, suffuse it with joy. Others gird in armor, find strength in guns and tanks, or see salvation by the hands of man. But metal melts and metal twists, and man is clothed in flesh. We know true power lies in you. We speak your name. We know you hear, and you renew the strength of man so he can stand to live.
Okay, so just want to say a couple of things about Bernstein. We notice she's not concerned with numbering the verses. She's not concerned with the superscription. She's not concerned with trying to be a literal translation. She's going for what does this psalm mean to her? You notice very little punctuation, but there is some in this psalm, which is very different than most of the others we've read, almost no punctuation. So it's interesting to note where there is punctuation. And I think that she's, by saying, my God, exclamation mark, hear me, exclamation mark, is exactly responding to the element of this psalm of reaching out and asking for help. You know, Anne Lamott wrote that great book, Wow, Thanks, no, Help, Wow, Thanks, right? The 3 different forms of prayer. Wow, the world is a beautiful place. I'm so grateful for all that I have. Thanks, gratitude, expressing gratitude, and then help, just crying out, screaming out for help. So that's what she really emphasizes. With those exclamation marks. Help, thanks, wow, thank you, yes. All right, so let's stop there and see if there are comments, either from the first or the questions or comments or reactions to see how Bernstein dealt with the.
Okay. There was a question very early
Yes.
on in
Sorry.
chat. Why it was the God of Jacob,
and
not Abraham or Isaac?
Excellent question. It's often referred to Elohe Yaakov because Jacob is the one who wrestled with the angels and became Yisrael, became Israel. So there's often a calling back to that sense of transformation, that Jacob was the one who became Israel, who became by questioning, by living through that struggle with the angels. So that's often that's a very good for you to notice that.
Cantor Nimi.
Oh, I was just going to say, I also anachronistically associate Elohe Yaakov with the later rabbinic tradition of associating Jacob with evening prayer. And so like times of darkness, uncertainty,
Interesting. That's beautiful.
running from danger, those kinds of things. I know that it's not time-wise connected, but it
that's
does.
Okay. Again, I said how we make it meaningful to us is what matters. So what Cantor Nimi is referring to is that after the temple was destroyed and there was no longer sacrifices, although it started before the destruction of the temple, we associate Shacharit with Abraham, Mincha with Isaac, and the evening service of Mariv with Jacob. So that's a beautiful read. That's beautiful.
Susan Stein. Susan, if you'd unmute yourself.
Here I am. I was wondering, could anybody make an offering, whether it was burnt or grain, or did you have to be a certain class to do that?
You mean in the times of the actual temple?
Right.
No, anybody could make offerings, though women weren't required to, but it wasn't a class issue. But obviously it was more difficult for people who had less money and less animals.
Okay, thank you.
Randy Axelrod.
I believe he points out in his notes how he uses the word respond, not answer, because answer would be a direct response to whatever it is you're asking for. And by responding, the person, the supplicant, has to be listening to hear what God is saying. And it's not direct.
I think that's a beautiful point, Randy. And yes, Levy says that the idea is that we're not talking about a direct, please give me this and I'll be better. And all of us know that in our lives, we've gotten responses from the universe. If you don't want to use the word God, we've learned things about ourselves. We've gotten a response that has required us to be open to hear it. It's not necessarily the response we want. and is not necessarily a direct answer, but it's a response that has given us depth or transformed us in deep ways. And we've talked about this a little bit before in class, the ability to look back on our lives and understand that in times of great difficulty, there have been responses which have emerged to give us strength that we couldn't have imagined, but you have to be open to it. And it's not a simple answer. So I think, Randy, that's a very, very good point.
Alicia Fowler.
And by the way, Levy also says for him, one of the reasons he thinks that Jacob is used is because God responded to Jacob in very low points of Jacob's life. So maybe that's why Jacob is there. So that's another explanation. There is no one explanation to anything. Keep that in mind. Just because I blah, 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 say something, it's only me, blah, 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 saying something. You have as legitimate a response as I do.
Alicia.
Yeah, I was noticing, and I see it a little bit better in the altar than in Levy, but the parallelism, usually, not always, but often we see it as like A, then B, and then on the next line, we sort of do something that's like not A, not B, or something more kind of direct. And in this one, the parallelism completes a verse in this really lovely way that creates like an arc. So if it's, may God send you help from the sanctum, then from Zion may God sustain you, which creates this really lovely arc. Which I just love because it makes the whole psalm at the beginning feel like an unfurling and then like a recoil. So there's this like giving out and then taking back. Not in a bad way, that makes it sound bad, but just this really lovely like out and in, which seems to kind of mimic the sense of responsiveness of God.
Beautiful. That's beautiful.
A number of us were noticing the strong male bent of Bernstein. Not only does Bernstein personalize God as he, but in the end, Bernstein says, man, and you renew the strength of man so he can stand to live.
That's what she's choosing to do. Again, that if we look, when we go to Fisher, you'll see there's no gender. So for whatever reason you might imagine for her, she's seeing a very male, but it's certainly in the Hebrew, because we know Hebrew is a gendered language, that we're reading a text that's probably 2,300 years old. But Fisher, and that's why we want to look at all these different translations, you'll see Fisher doesn't use any gender. What the struggle is to push yourselves to learn something even from somebody whose translation or interpretation is not a natural fit to your own worldview. That's what I urge you to do. It's easy to say, oh, I like this one, I don't like that one. What's harder to do is to say, okay, this doesn't naturally reflect me, but I want to figure out what I can learn from this person. Do you know what I mean? That's really important to do.
Sarah Siegel.
Right. Maybe I've got Earth Day fever, but I really enjoyed translating, was it Aztecha Yamale, as your trees, he will fill up with leaves, effectively.
Beautiful. That's lovely.
And I just thought at the very bottom for parallelism, it said basically the people on the horses are going to fall, but we're going to stand. And I just imagine that as maybe the trees also standing.
Beautiful. And we speak about like a tree standing by the water, right? From Psalm 1. There's a sense of strength, of being rooted in the earth, of having beautiful.
Saul Zalkin.
Harold, could you put the Bernstein up again, please?
Of course I can.
Thank you. So her first paragraph is like, takes all that beginning and makes it, I mean, for me personally, says it. When I'm scared and need and cry, I want God to hear me. And then she makes this space between may he what?
Yeah.
May he. And then in the third paragraph, you know, she includes the may he in it. I note in the Levy and in hers, they can't get rid of the militaristic stuff in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the beginning is one thing and the end is attached to the beginning. and the middle is like the original poets just stuck it in there for some reason, I think.
Well, I think because there was military threats and being under military attack, I think that's kind of a realistic from history. So I think this is saying even it's not just spiritual attack. It's also talking about being physically under attack. So we'll see that in a bunch of different Psalms where there's clearly a response to war and clearly a response to invading armies. And as I said, everything can be internal and external. And again, I don't worry, and you have to figure out for you ultimately where is your deepest meaning. And we all saw that while Trump was president, and we know that those forces are not even underground in America, but they are ready to attack and destroy us. We know the moment they get power, we will be under terrible attack. That's not just an internal attack. Those are real concrete ways that we will be under attack.
Peter
Okay,
Klein. Peter Klein.
There's a real sense of peoplehood or nationhood in this particular
Yes.
psalm. And looking at Safari, there was a comment that if Abraham brought the knowledge of our God to the world in general, that Jacob was the father of a people, a specific people. And I found that was very powerful because I associate Jacob with many other things, but the reality is a sense of us as peoplehood and again, of a militaristic position. Last week, I was looking at different types of stelae that refer to Israel. And there's one that talks of not an Israeli one, but rather of another competing nation that talked about how the Israelites, the Judaites had come and conquered them, but that their God had responded and allowed them to capture thousands of Israeli soldiers and to sacrifice them to Chemosh. So the idea of threat and consequence is really deep within in these Psalms.
This is considered by some who make this categorization, it's called a royal psalm because it refers to a king. But again, that doesn't mean how we'll interpret it, but yes.
Susan or Doug?
When we read, can you put the Bernstein thing up again, please?
Absolutely.
When I read through that, it pops into my head that the Beatles wrote a song based on this psalm. When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And when the brokenhearted people living in the world agree, there will be an answer, let it be.
Wow. Love that.
That's right from the psalm.
I love that.
Would have been a great offering. Lisa Brown, thank you.
So our discussion about the masculine language has really made me think of where does feminine power live exactly, because all of the Psalms are so dedicated to power and, like save me. And it's a very male power that's described there. And I've really felt just from this conversation, I've really felt the lack of whatever female power is, where do they live in this? And is there such a thing? I mean, is power or, the whole idea of yin and yang? I'm kind of riffing here, but you know what I mean.
Good question.
So Rabbi, that was the last hand up right now. And then Hazan Hirsch says, in Bernstein's opening verse reminds me of a bridge over troubled water when you're down and troubled and you need a helping hand. So and it is 10:42.
So tomorrow, while I'm not with you, what I'd like you to do is do in Chavruta, if you can does everybody, I don't know which books people have, but Harold has sent everybody the text to add to the mix Fisher tomorrow. And so in Chavruta to study Fisher, Harold, we've sent that to everybody, right?
Oh yes, last week.
So Fisher, Psalm 20. And go through Fisher in groups. You'll be divided when you join. Tasha will be with you and we'll divide everybody into groups of 3. Study Fisher together, and you can refer back to Levy and to Bernstein if you want to. And then on Wednesday, we'll study together again. And we'll finish this psalm on Thursday this week. So Harold, in terms of scheduling, but we're going to look at these three, because I didn't want to do only one right now, because you're all bringing out issues which are really, really important. So be thinking about how this psalm means something to you as we're doing this. This is the question of, what if you were to try and take every word of the psalm or every line of the psalm and make it meaningful to you? What would it look like? What would you have to change? What would you have to transform? How would you access spiritual meaning there? Assume there's spiritual meaning. That's the goal, is to say it's there, but you have to do the work to bridge from where you are as a human being in your life. And I want to again welcome our friends from Stockholm and from Hungary who are with us. And again, if you put your emails in the chat, Harold can add you to our email list so you can get all the materials.
And Cantor Nimi, would you like to sing us out?
Sure. And I don't have lyrics for Let It Be on hand, but perhaps folks can go listen to that afterwards, along with Bridge Over Troubled Water, You've Got a Friend, all those great things to talk about times of trouble. So again, this is Hine El Yeshuati, with this connection to that verse. I would note also that all of the 8 verses in this collection that are recited before the Havdalah blessings, except for one, have some derivation of that word that means to save or to rescue or to deliver, that Yud Shin Ayin root. Everything except for the Esther verse. So I thought it was just an interesting thing that this was the verse from Psalm 20 that they picked that talked about saving and rescuing, that to be recited on Saturday evening. Hine El Yeshuati Eftach velo evchar Ki ozi vezimrat ya Adonai Vayehini Yeshua She'altem mayim b'sason Imayinei ha'yeshua Adonai ha'yeshua Alamcha birchatecha sela Adonai tzivaot imanu Niskav lanu Elohei Yaakov sela Adonai tzivaot ashrei adam boteach bach Adonai hoshia hamelech yaneinu v'yom koreinu hayehudim haita Torah v'simcha v'sason v'ikar ken tiyeh lanu kos yeshuot ezah u'v'shem Adonai ekra.
Thank you very much, everybody. The